and today I'm going to be interviewing Pastor Luis Garcia. He's a campus pastor at Mantua and Next Steps leader at True North Church. True North is a non-denominational Christian church located in South Jersey. We have two campuses, one in Mantua and one in Collingswood. And it was founded in 2006 by pastors Joanne and Eric Eisenhart. And today, their son, Jesse Eisenhart, is the main pastor who speaks every Sunday. And today, Pastor Al is here with us.
Here I am.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Let's do it.
For starters, how long have you been going to True North?
So I have been going to True North for about 10 years. A part of the church for about 10 years. I've been on staff for almost 4 years. So.
All right, I'm going to ask you a few questions about religion and crime. Is that okay?
Let's do it. Fire away.
All right.
So True North has two campuses, like you mentioned. We have our Collingswood campus, we have our Mantua campus. And I always say it's full. Both locations are always full. You know, our goal really is to, have all of South Jersey, be a part of True North. And, we're a part of a church, we should say. We're all on the same team, I like to say. But a ballpark estimate, I'd say on a given weekend, well over 1,000 people.
Altogether?
Altogether. On an average weekend, plus or minus, between the three services at Mantua and one at Collingswood, give or take about 1,000 folks.
Is it diverse?
It is diverse. Yep, we have people from all walks of life. Sometimes people say there's we're the young church. We hear that a lot, but I always kind of say, well, we're a church that actually has young people, and I think that's what people are actually trying to say. I think that's more rare today, that there's actually a church that's reaching young people, that young people want to be a part of. Yeah. So we are diverse, and we, a lot of ethnicities, a lot of demographics as far as age goes, experience. So depending on how you define diverse, I think we are.
Awesome.
When you're in the church world, you have a different definition of religion, right? The word religion kind of makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Because you can really actually be religious about anything. You can be religious about watching Sunday football at 10 a.m. every Sunday. You can be religious about going to the gym every morning at 6 a.m. You can be religious about having a cup of tea before bed every night at 6. Right, so religious activity in the church context is really just, what you do every single week. And so it kind of makes me cringe, because I think a world without religion wouldn't look much different than what we see today. But a world that understands the value of a relationship with God, which religion should point you towards, would look much different. So if you were to ask me if religion no longer existed today, I would say that's probably a good thing, that people are stepping away from this idea of tradition, thinking that's what church is, showing up and, saying a prayer and then leaving, that to me isn't life-changing, but that's religion, right? Yeah. But when you have a relationship with God, when you have a relationship, we're a Christian church, so when you have a relationship with Jesus, there's actually life change that happens. It's not just something you do, it really becomes who you are. So I never view myself as a religious person. I see myself as a Christian, and everything I do flows out from that, but it's not just something I do to go through the motions every single week. So,
why do you think that religion has such a negative connotation?
I think the church as a whole, not necessarily our church or any specific church, but I think that the church, right, globally as a whole, maybe has done a poor job of portraying what a relationship with God should look like. And so I know growing up, I grew up Catholic. I wanted nothing to do with church. And it was really in my eyes, it was, kind of dull, routine, religious, boring. And it wasn't until I had that, revelation for myself of, who God was, that I ever began to actually, listen and enjoy what I was hearing and applying it to my life.
That's good.
So you can have morals without religion, right? There's people out there who don't believe in God, but they believe in good and evil, which I would argue, if you believe in evil, you have to believe in good, right? Because you can't recognize evil without recognizing good. And if you can recognize that there's good and evil, you assume or admit that there's moral law, right? There is a moral law of what is right and what is wrong. And if you admit there's a moral law, you have to admit that there's a moral lawgiver. You have to admit that there is a greater authority that defines what is right and what is wrong. And so I don't necessarily think religion instills that in you. I think as a human, there is this natural born curiosity about the world we live in and why things happen, and you begin to develop that for yourself. And I think out of that, you begin to understand that there is something greater, something beyond yourself, and so I don't think there's any one answer to that question, but I think that morality isn't dictated by religion. I think religion amplifies your morality. And so when you begin to walk in a belief system, you become hyper aware of what is right and what is wrong. And you begin to see it much differently than simply being right and being wrong. You see the consequences of it. You see the long-term effects of it. So I don't think religion or the absence of it would do away with morality, but I do think its presence amplifies morality. This is like a really, a lot of complicated questions, some heavy questions here. I hope it'll be less religious, based on the definition.
The word religious.
Yeah. Depending on how you define the word religion. I hope it's less religious. I hope people begin to see things through, through a moral lens, and that it just becomes who they are, not necessarily what they do. In the sense of what most people recognize as religious, I see it being less religious in general. I've heard it said our generation is the unchurched generation. And so really, most generations up until this point, in America specifically, grew up in some sort of church setting. It was a part of, American lifestyle until our generation. And so I see that secular trending, or that secular trend continuing to trend, and society as a whole becoming less religious. I see it being less religious, but I also seeing those who are involved in their faith having a greater depth and understanding of what that actually means.
Yeah,
cool.
Good.
So, kind of going back to the whole moral question, I think religion might make someone hesitate, but I don't know if it would necessarily stop someone from committing a crime. But then again, it may. It may, for most people, we don't do something not necessarily because of the immediate repercussions, but because of the eternal consequence. That thought's in the back of our head. In Christianity, the Ten Commandments is something that, whether you're a Christian or not, you believe most of the principles that they stand for. You won't steal, you won't kill, you'll honor your father and your mother, right? So those things are in a lot of ways innate without religion. So you can be an atheist and believe that it's wrong to murder. You can be an atheist and believe that it's wrong to steal. So I don't know if religion would necessarily stop or increase the likelihood of committing a crime, as much as it may give someone the opportunity to second guess their actions because of those eternal consequences, right? And which is why I use that word religion loosely, because if you get a group of people to believe something consistently, that could be a religion. You know, it doesn't make it moral, but it can be considered a religion.
Like a pastor or a priest or somebody doing crime.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of examples of that as well. You know, and it's heartbreaking because there's an element of, there's an increased element of evil, I think, when it is one of those individuals. Where most people, after something bad happens, will turn to religion and faith to find hope again. What happens when the person who committed the crime was, you know, a pastor or a priest, and you can't turn to that source of hope? You know, countless examples of, you know, in Catholicism of priests and, you know, sexual misconduct. Countless examples in Christianity of, you know, pastors and all sorts of different misconduct, whether that's, you know, sexual in nature or abuse of power or theft, or, you know, so I think that exists in every element of society. I don't think it's confined to religion. I think it's amplified because of religion, right? Because it was someone who stood for something right or good that committed this heinous crime. It's amplified all the more. Wow. So separation of church and state really is what. So there's a lot of myths about separation of church and state. In fact, I think most people think it's law, and it's not. And think about it for a second. When you're actually talking to someone and you're actually asking them to separate everything that they actually believe and hold as morally true in their life, and yet you're asking them to do something separate and apart from that. I don't care who you are, I don't know what setting you're in, you're always going to have a lens that you view something through. And so this idea of separation in church and state was really, there's a lot of history behind it, but it actually came from, you know, a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote. And it was actually, you know, something in light of the First Amendment, which guarantees, you know, freedom of speech. You know, and if you're diving back into American history, fleeing from a monarchy, you know, that was designed to protect both sides. And so we always hear separation of church and state like the church shouldn't influence the government. But in reality, it was designed for both ways. The government shouldn't also influence the church. And so I think that if the church does a good job in teaching the Bible and sharing the gospel and what it, you know, in the fullness of what it has to say about every topic or aspect of society, I think they'll make those decisions for themselves. You know, I don't think the church has to explicitly decide, you know, to stand up one day and say, do this or do that. I think that if the gospel is at the center of what they're doing and they're teaching, you know, the Bible the way it's supposed to be taught, that people who are, you know, under that teaching and that preaching will view things through a biblical lens, and they'll be able to make those decisions for themselves. But they're, again, teaching the Bible the way they're supposed to. People who are under that will understand that and make decisions based on that. So, cool.
And last question.
We made it. Wow. Really theological, really heavy. So, man, really heavy thinking here. I go back to really the first story in the Bible where Satan, or the enemy, is presented, right? And it's in the Garden of Eden. And the one command God gave to Adam and Eve was, do not eat from this tree, for if you do, you will surely die, right? And what happens? You know, Satan, the enemy, comes in the form of a serpent, and he whispers in their ear, you know, did God surely tell you that you will die? Did he say you will die, right? Who, you know, is that really what he said? And I think a lot of evil enters into this world in those small voices, and it begins in the most subtle way And so I don't think any major crime happens out of the blue. I think it's small voices that over the years have said, no, this is okay. All right, now, let's take it a step higher. Now this is okay. Now let's take it a step higher. Now this is okay. Which is what I think is the real danger in society today of relativism, is when you allow one thing that was once wrong, then it's only a matter of time before the scale increases. And so I think people think, Satan's in a red suit with a giant pitchfork and he says, steal that, or take that person out, right? And I don't think that's true. I don't think he does that, but I think he will convince you that a small thing is wrong, or a small thing that is wrong is actually right. And then the next time, something a little bit more wrong is now right. And now the next time, something a little bit more wrong is now right. And then before you know it, someone is committing a crime or doing something that, they never thought they would. How many times do you hear, I never thought of, you watch those prison shows or something, I never thought I'd be here. But it was those, right, exactly. And it wasn't just the crime you got caught for, it was probably the countless little compromises that you made along the way that ultimately led you to the crime that you got caught for. So I believe that there is real evil in the world, that there's an enemy out there, and his priority is to distract you and create doubt. And sure, I think that's an element of it, but I also think we're born into an imperfect world where bad happens, and we can't be surprised when bad happens. There's no perfect. The Bible even says there none are righteous, not even one. I'm not perfect. Our senior pastor isn't perfect. None of our pastors on staff are perfect. None are righteous. And the only one who is righteous is Jesus. And I think, when you understand that's the world we live in today, that everyone's imperfect. Why are we so surprised when bad things happen? And of course, it's, obviously a sad thing when it does happen, but I don't think I don't think it's the devil here and the angel here, right? Like everyone sees on TV. I think a lot of it is our own tendencies that will develop over time that will lead us into things that, we never expected in it.
Free will, too.
Right. And I think that's something...
Ultimately, everything is still our decision.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that most people forget, is that God wired us with free will. And so, a lot of people will say, well, if God is good, why is there evil in the world? Yeah. And there's a passage in the Bible that says God works all things for the good of those who love him. But it doesn't say all things are good, right? It says that in every situation, God can bring good out of it. But bad things happen. And we live in a world where we can't be surprised by that, because we're humans and we're broken, and broken people are given free will. And free will is a dangerous thing in the hands of people who maybe don't have the correct moral compass, right? But you're right, that's at the root of free will. So
does everything happen for a reason then?
That's a great saying. I feel like that's a whole other conversation. Does everything happen for a reason? I can't say that there's situations out there that I'll never be able to fully understand. And I sit down with people all the time, and a lot of times I don't give them advice. The first thing I'll usually say is, I have absolutely no idea what you're going through. I can't. I haven't been there. I haven't experienced that. I didn't have that situation. And so I can't sit here and tell you that it happened for a reason, but I can tell you that God can use that situation and for some way, somehow bring good out of it. Without taking too much time, I grew up in not the greatest situations and not in the greatest experiences, and yet I never viewed myself as a victim. I became a Christian at 16. I didn't grow up, I went to church, but I didn't really believe in it growing up, and I became a Christian at 16, and all of the bad that I had experienced, and much less so than a lot of people, but all of the bad that I had experienced, I realize now in hindsight, developed me, and it made me empathize with people, and I'm able to sit across the table from someone and say, hey, I don't know about that, but I can speak into that, and you can get through that, and you can do better, and you can lead your family better, and all sorts of things. And so I didn't waste the pain, I didn't waste the situation. I can't tell you that everything that happened in my life was for a reason, because there was a lot of things that was just the result of other people's decisions. But going forward, I have free will too. And now I can make the decisions that, will set up my family for success, or, or change things for our future, and, and then that's my responsibility. So that was a trick question. That wasn't, you said there was a last question, but you threw a bonus in there.
It just came to me.
Yeah, that was good.
All right, that's all the questions.
That's all the questions? All right. Cheers, class.